Hello and welcome to Chapter 8 in Business Ethics. This chapter is called Recognizing and Respecting the Rights of All. The sections in the chapter, there are 5 of them. First one is Diversity and Inclusion in the Workforce. Accommodating Different Abilities and Faiths is the second. The third, Sexual Identification and Orientation. 4, Income Inequalities. And 5, Animal Rights and the Implications for Business. Our header picture is for a wide variety of faces superimposed on a map of the globe, hinting at the idea that we're going to be thinking about a diverse workforce. And in section 8.1, that's exactly what we do. We're going to look at some of the benefits a business might incur from having employee diversity. And we'll think about some of the challenges that come along with having employee diversity. So right on the first page of this chapter, our book tells us that, effective business managers in the 21st century need to be aware of a broad array of ethical choices they can make that affect their employers, their customers, society as a whole. What these decisions have in common is the need for managers to recognize and respect the rights of all. Sometimes I love this book, but I think it doesn't necessarily goes into the why enough. It skips over it a little bit. It does use the rest of the chapter to fill things in. When you read that sentence, you might think, well, why? Why should we recognize and respect the rights of all? And this is a little gateway to where we can talk about philosophy a little bit more. Where did our modern notion of human rights come from? In the West, which is the intellectual heritage that we have hundreds of years of history where people have debated concepts about freedom, rights, justice, and equality. And we've been born into a notion of human rights that's been around our whole lives. But before the Industrial Revolution and capitalism, there were vastly different political systems in place, and individualized human rights were not part of the picture. The people who ran the show, the monarchs, are the ones that had all the rights, and you had to obey. Whatever it is that they said was going to be the structure of their economy and the structure of their politics was how things were. And the generalized mass of people were expected to fall in line. Over the years, of course, people rejected this. They rebelled. They created systems of ideas that could support the understanding that as human beings, we are all equal. Yes, we all have different experiences, we have different skills, we have different goals, but underneath it all, we are rational creatures who interact with one another in our communities. And the best way to progress is to recognize that if you want human rights for yourself, the right to be left alone by the government, which means you have free speech and the right to vote and the right to move around as you so choose without the government or the military restricting your movement. You can pick your jobs. You can pick how you want to live your life. You can pick your religion. Well, then other people have to be able to do that too. It's a bit of a take, maybe a little bit more nuanced and probably too nuanced to go into for this class, on the golden rule. If you want freedom and you want respect, well, so does everybody else. And we have to treat one another with this kind of respect. And this sort of core of an idea developed over centuries to become a more modern notion of human rights. People should have basic access to needs. Everybody needs food. Everybody needs water. Everybody needs shelter. We're social creatures, so we also need companionship. We need something that is fulfilling and meaningful. So these turn into what we think of as human rights. And that is one reason, intellectually, using reason, that we should recognize and respect the rights of all, even if we don't agree with them. because as we'll see, of course, we all have our own personal biases and ways of looking at the world, and sometimes those don't match up perfectly. So when we get into the workforce, we might encounter people who live their life by a different set of goals and values than we do. So what should we do? Well, according to our chapter and thinking about ethics in the business world, we should learn ways to not only get along, but to use each other's perspectives to improve the outcomes of our business and the environment of our everyday workspaces. So, of course, we all know that 100 years or so ago in the United States, the workforce looked a lot different than it does today. It was majority white men, and people of color or women were shut out of a lot of jobs that they might have chosen to join if they had had the opportunity. And that's still happening. And that's what this graphic is telling us all about. In 2010, we had 81% white people in the workforce in the United States, 12% Black, 5% Asian, 2% all other. But by 2050, it's projected to change, and it'll keep changing, wherein 75% is projected to be white, 8% Asian, 12% Black, and 5% all other. I found this interesting because they switched from race to ethnicity here, saying that Hispanic individuals are taking up a larger portion of the workforce than they ever have before. And if you think about the mixtures between race and ethnicity, it doesn't necessarily seem to overlap perfectly, because I know many Hispanic people identify as people of color or as white or as Black. And yeah, it doesn't necessarily overlap with these two. I have to take a look a little bit more to see what was going on with those graphs. But what about the goal that they wanted us to think about? The benefits of employee diversity in the workplace. I'm wondering if any of you have encountered arguments like this before. Whenever you have people with the same backgrounds and experience making decisions for any group of people, let alone a business, they're all going to solve problems not in the exact same way, but they have background knowledge that one another shares and not background knowledge of other people's lives. So if you have a whole bunch of white men on the executive force of a company like you might have in the 1940s, and they're trying to make feminine products, or they're trying to export farming equipment to another continent, they don't have the experience to recognize the needs and desires of their hopeful clients. So if you have women, or if you have people of color, or if you have people that have lived in other cultures that come to the table, they bring a different perspective that is valuable for the bottom line in your business, let alone respecting the rights of everyone. Things have changed, but we get the sort of negative here in that there are many sectors in our current society that still haven't really evened out. And equality seems to happen bit by bit. In Google specifically, and the technology sector in a wider sense, it is still mostly white men overall in technical positions and in the leadership teams. For the most part, our book tells us that tech companies are aware of this and are openly working toward balancing gender equality and balancing other kinds of identity markers to better reflect how contemporary society actually works. And then we get to these actual benefits. People have done studies let's see here, McKinsey and Company did a widespread analysis of many different companies and saw that gender diverse companies outperformed those who were less gender diverse by 15%. And ethnically diverse companies outperformed non-ethnically diverse companies by 35%. So there is some hard data to show that companies that take diversity seriously, to pull in these diverse experiences and viewpoints, financially do better. There's definitely the opposite idea that, okay, these two things are correlated, but they don't prove causation. So you've probably heard the phrase correlation isn't causation. Just because two things happen together in space and time does not mean that one thing caused the other. That is what's known as a logical fallacy. So you might wake up one day and have a scratchy throat and a headache. And you could conclude that the scratchy throat caused the headache because they happened at the exact time, they were correlated with one another. But you'd probably be wrong, because a third thing, a cold virus, is likely the culprit, and it caused both of the symptoms. Correlation does, however, point us toward the idea that something is happening with these two items, and it warrants further investigation. Some people also think that the reason technology has remained less gender diverse is because of innate abilities of men and women, or even further, sometimes people are a bit more prejudiced and say there are innate abilities in certain cultures or races. And the data has definitely not shown anything of the sort. We know that we have gender roles. We know that we have strong social pressures. We know that genetics contributes to who we become, but it is such a complex system that I would caution doubt in anyone that tells you they know for sure that the goals, desires, abilities, and drives of any particular group of humans is genetically programmed. We just don't know. And another caveat, so a way of thinking about it, is equality on the level that we see it in the early 21st century hasn't been around that long. We've only been pushing to have this equal rights and respect in the workplace for all of the population for a couple of generations. Human beings are conditioned, or they are biologically programmed, to like short-term proof of things. We've talked about short-term and long-term before, and how the short-term can be so tempting. If you're presented with a salad or a hamburger, of course the hamburger is going to be more tempting for most people because it's delicious. But you know that if you eat a hamburger every day, it's probably going to lead to less health for you in the future. Lots of things take time, especially complex, gigantic societal enterprises. Was this the one I just clicked on? Oh, they have two of them in a row. That's good. Okay. Let's see. They have one of the cases from the real world here from 8.1. We can take a look at this now. Texas Health Resources, a Dallas area healthcare and hospital company, ranked #1 among Fortune's best workplaces for diversity. They employ 75% female and 40% minority employees. They go above and beyond, according to our textbook at least, where they offer English classes for Hispanic workers, and they host dozens of professional events to foster networking among peers with different backgrounds. Another one is Marriott. They have apparently 65% minority employees. That's a very, very high percentage. But only 15% of its executives are minorities. And this is minority in the United States. And our real-world critical thinking question is, do they rank highly for diversity because hospitality and healthcare industries tend to hire more women and minorities in general? Why or why not? The question they're pointing to is how, even in our push for diversity, sometimes we reproduce inequalities or injustices. Because though there are more women and ethnic and racial minorities in the workforce than there ever have been in the United States before, disproportionately, women and people of color work for minimum wage, so-called unskilled labor or low-valued labor. And oftentimes we say things like, well, we need to appreciate our nurses, but we don't follow through and appreciate them in their paycheck. So another couple things you can think about, whether it happened by accident because there are more women in the healthcare industries, or they did it on purpose. Couldn't they still serve as models for other companies that are looking to diversify? And that's a question I would leave to you to think about. Well, they skipped right over, with the slides at least, the challenges of a diverse workforce. I mentioned one of them, how if you imagine you're a manager, you inherit a team of people with their own viewpoints, yes, which is to be celebrated and applauded, but also their own biases and prejudices. And that can be incredibly challenging, even if people are aware of them and are trying to minimize their own bias and they recognize the value of diversity. Having such a wide variety of viewpoints, cultures, and attitudes toward work can clash. And that can be very, very challenging in a diverse workplace. You need a place where workers can come every day and feel safe. Another point our book makes is, I think, an understatement in that people don't like change all that much. You have to really open yourself up and think about an issue when you are initially used to something being a certain way, and then all of a sudden things change. We see this backlash everywhere. Whenever you hear a comedian talking about how nobody can be anti-PC, some people think that that is a backlash to a more welcoming attitude toward diverse individuals. Let's see how it says it in our book. Oh, it gives the example. I remember this happening, 2017. Google has an internal bulletin board system where people can post on different sub-forums. And one of their engineers posted a long diatribe about how diversity pushes in technology are never going to work because women are just programmed and they biologically to not be interested in or good at technology. Men have higher drive for status. And Google fired him. Google made public statements saying how they disavow anything talking about all men or all women. And consequently, this guy formed, I think, a class action suit. Yes, saying that they'd been discriminated against because they were white, men, and conservative. Our book tells us it's not the standard reverse discrimination lawsuit because it goes to the heart of this idea that diversity is a goal that we should be aiming for, and how something common to human nature is this strong backlash to any set of changing values or behaviors. And then at the very end of section 8.1, our book asks you to think about what you would do if you were in charge of a team and you had people of different sexual orientations, different genders, different religions, ethnicities, and backgrounds. How do you consider each person's skills and weaknesses and how the people who work for you might work as a team? Some people might abstain from alcohol. So if you have a team building event that is at a bar, you're automatically excluding someone. If someone has particular needs for prayer, do you go out of your way and provide a space for them? When you're creating an attractive work environment and those perks that we talked about in the past, flex time and recreation rooms and gyms and coffee shops, do some people with different perspectives prefer other things that you wouldn't have even thought of? How would you figure all this stuff out? Section 8.2 talks about accommodating different abilities and different faiths. I gave some background on human rights in the philosophical world, so this first part of the video ran a little bit long. I'm going to stop part 1 here, and we will start 8.2 in the second video. See you then.